teens up to age 15 are protected online. Also, thanks to the privacy advocates, the Direct Marketing Association, and all of the companies that have joined us here this morning, I want to acknowledge the timely and detailed replies we received from the companies in response to our investigation, responses that have helped the Privacy Caucus begin to untangle and understand industry practices. We have entered a brave new world of big data. From the dawn of human history until 2003, the human race generated 5 exabytes of data. That's equivalent to the information in about 20 billion 200-page books. Now, in just 2012 alone, we will produce that same amount of data in this just 1 year. And that is incredible. This era of big data can deliver tremendous benefits, such as access to education, entertainment, communication, and commerce. And many of the companies here this morning help provide these significant benefits. But there is also a cost. Companies can compile digital dossiers on every American. What you purchase, where you go, who you date, when you go to the doctor, and why. There is a Dickensian quality to this situation. It is the best of technology and the worst of technologies simultaneously. Technologies are neither inherently good nor bad. It is up to us to animate them with the long-standing values developed over the years. What I fear is that we have gone from an era of data keepers to an era of data reapers. Many companies today are collecting, using, and selling a vast array of personal information about the American public without their knowledge or consent. And that is wrong. No company should put a for sale sign outside the house containing America's personal information. No company should deny consumers access to their personal information. No company should play fast and loose with America's most sensitive information. Our goal is to bring data brokers out here so that we can shed light on an industry that has amassed dossiers on hundreds of millions of Americans. There are differing opinions about how exactly to define this industry, and we're here today in order to hear the views of the panelists on the topic. But today's briefing is about your company's practices, not about definitions. We also know that there are many privacy laws in place today. HIPAA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Graham-Leach-Bliley. But we know that there are gaps in the coverage under existing law. So we just intend to ratchet up the transparency of industry practices so that we can develop a system of oversight and policy reform that ensures that we are fostering consumers' control over their personal information. So we thank all of you for being here today. And let me turn now and to recognize the co-chair of the caucus, Joe Barton from Texas. Thank you, Chairman Martin.
What did you say, Dickensian? Dickensian.
Tale of Two Cities.
I know who Charles Dickens was. Well, in Lyndon Johnsonian fashion, if you ain't listening, you ain't learning. I will simply say I concur with your opening statement. I thank our witnesses, not our witnesses, our panelists. Special commendation to our commissioners from the FTC for what y'all just done. And I think we're going to have a very informative briefing. Unfortunately, you and I are going to have to go vote here pretty quick, but we will come back. We're supposed to vote between now and 11 o'clock. But I do want to commend everybody for being here and look forward to that.
Great. Thank you. So let's begin by hearing from the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, John Leibowitz. The commission, Commissioner Brill and all the commissioners are considering an update of children's online privacy laws right now. And their work has been heroic in terms of teeing up this issue and ensuring that there is in place a framework for providing that kind of protection. So I'd like to turn to you, Mr. Chairman, and invite you to make any comments that you would like to make.
Well, I will be brief because we have my colleague Julie Rowe here, who is an expert on privacy issues and data brokers, who's really taken the lead on this issue in the commission. But I'll speak briefly. First, you called us the COPPA cops, and we feel very strongly that that's something that is critically important for us to do. We brought, I believe, more than a dozen COPPA, well over a dozen COPPA cases, and we're in the process of finishing up an update of COPPA, but we would not be able to be the cops on the beat if you and Mr. Barton and others, bipartisan members who care enormously about privacy, hadn't given us this statute that allows us to do rulemaking and gives us some flexibility. So, I want to commend you for that. And I want to commend the two of you for this just terrific caucus where you bring people in, you talk about issues. There is a lot of partisanship, and as both of you know, some of it is very vitriolic in Congress today. That's not true about privacy. I was just rereading Mr. Barton's really terrific piece in The Hill from a couple months ago on kids and privacy, and it is just excellent, and it underscores just how bipartisan the issue of privacy and privacy protection, especially, of course, with kids, is today, and that's really important. It allows us the ability to move forward. It's also very, very bipartisan in our commission as well. The work you're doing is incredibly important, and I just want to commend you and all the executives here from the data brokers industry for being here today and talking about your work. From our perspective, and we wrote about this in our privacy report that we issued in March, there are a lot of good that data brokers do, and I think we understand that. They provide significant benefits for consumers. But it's also true that there's no interface with those consumers themselves. They are not only like advertising networks, and in fact, in some sense, aggregators of some of the data from advertising networks, invisible data catchers. And consumers have little or no interaction with data brokers. And so we have called, it's a unanimous recommendation of our privacy report, for more transparency among data brokers, and perhaps the ability for consumers for material information to be able to ensure that it's accurate. And we have called for sort of targeted legislation to provide consumers access to information about information held by data brokers, and we want to work with members of Congress going forward, and we want to work with the industry. So with that, I will turn it back to you. And again, we're fortunate to have Commissioner Bill here. She has just been a leader in these issues. As you can see, she really doesn't need to have all these materials because she knows this by heart. But but she likes having them. Thank you so much, and thank you for your continued work. We want to work with the privacy. We want to work with the privacy caucus going forward.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Julie Drill, thank you for all of your work. And whenever you're ready, please begin.
Oh, well, I don't know that I really have much to add. I do want to join the chairman in thanking both of you, both Congressman Markey and Congressman Barton, for your wonderful leadership on all privacy issues. I do also agree with the chairman that conversations like this are precisely the kind of conversations we need to have so that we can elucidate more for consumers, industry, and the public at large. What are the information collection practices that are going on? How is information collected? How is it used? And most importantly, I think many of the companies that are here today do provide tools to consumers to give them information about data collection practices, to give them choices about it, but consumers don't know how to get that information. They don't know where to go. So I think shedding some light on the tools that are already out there, making them more visible for consumers, just as we called for in our privacy report, is incredibly important. I think you guys, you gentlemen, very well outlined the harms and the concerns as well as the benefits about data collection, so I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I do think, we at the Commission have worked very hard to try to bring the enforcement actions that we can bring. We've been very active with respect to data brokers and really all sorts of companies in the ecosystem of data collection and use. both online and offline. And I think the question today is, outside of the context of enforcement actions, how can we make, in general, this industry more transparent and more to do what it's doing and still to ensure that consumers have appropriate tools available to them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, very much. I think it might be helpful if we could just go around the room and each one of our guests could introduce themselves so that everyone will know who is here and who will be speaking. And so if you may.
Yes. My name is Jennifer Barrett Glasgow, and I'm the Global Privacy and Public Policy Officer for Accent Corporation.
I'm Tony Hadley. I'm Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs for the Experian Group of Companies.
I'm Paul Zarowski with Equifax, and I'll just preempt too much of this discussion by saying I'm in the midst of my third week. Welcome. I'm Jerry Searso. I'm Senior Vice President at Direct Marketing Association. Thank you for having us.
Edward Winsky, U.S. Public Interest Research Group Consumer Program Director.
I'm Chris Wolf. My mic isn't working, but I'll speak loudly. I lead the privacy practice at the Hogan Lovells Law Firm. I'm here representing Park Haynes.
I'm Latanya Sweeney. I'm a professor at Harvard University and director of the Data Privacy Lab.
I'm Jim Adler. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and VP of Data Systems at Intellius.
Vance Goodmanson, Vice President, Regulatory and Legal for FICO.
I'm Jeffrey Chester, Executive Director, Center for Digital Democracy.
Jeanette Fitzgerald, General Counsel of Exelon.
Great. So I think it might be helpful if we just begin this conversation about children and what protections should be provided to them. You know what the Federal Trade Commission is doing. And I think it would be helpful for us if we could just hear from the industry first what you think they're doing makes sense. And as well, whether or not you think it could be expanded up to kids 15 and under without affecting adults and the privacy laws, which may or may not ever affect them. So I think that if any of you from the industry would like to begin, I think we'd be more than happy to hear from you.
Well, I'll start with Jerry Searso from DMA. I'm getting feedback here. I'll put that back. The industry agrees that children. I'm going to just turn it.
Ed, can you move over that microphone?
You can still hear me. The industry agrees with. We agreed with COPPA when we first enacted, and we've been working with the Commission on trying to deal with children. Many of the companies that you see here today do not knowingly have information on children. They do not market to children, and we think that that's important. Any information on children requires parental consent. One of the things that, and to Councilman Markey and Councilman Barton, one of the things that can be a problem in trying to set up rules to deal with children is you have to know that it's a child. And most of these companies do not collect information on children knowingly. And I think that's one of the real keys that the Federal Trade Commission has in its rules and the way he wrote, the way the Congress put COPPA together is knowing. Now we have websites that are directed to children. You impute knowledge on that, and the Commission is looking at trying to expand that as we look at mobile applications and so forth and collecting. But the problem that comes if you get away from actually knowing is if you have an affirmative duty that these companies will have to begin to collect information on children, to actually have information that Jerry Searso is 11 years old. At least I used to be, and you have to keep it as it goes forward. So that's one of the problems that I think we see, and I think the CET, the Center for Democracy and Technology, has said the same, and that there's a fear there of forcing companies to collect information.
Well, but isn't it the truth if somebody's listing Nickelodeon.com or Legoland, there's a pretty high probability that they're a child?
Yes, and that's exactly correct, and that's one of the points that the FTC has in its rules, that if you go to a site that is directed towards children, you are assumed, even if I'm on it, you assume that I am a child, if that's it. And then also the idea that they have, if I tell you that I'm 10 years old, even though I'm not, I am 10 years old. But if I also tell you that actually a 10-year-old is up there saying that they're 17 or 18 or 19 on there, that the companies can believe that. It's one of the parts of balancing that we have to try and collect information on children or not. And the knowledge factor is very important. It's both in the law and in the FTC rule.
So if I can just respond to Jerry's point, it's a very good one, and I'll start sort of at the weedy level, and I'll go up to maybe 20 or 30,000 feet. So one of the things that Jerry alluded to is whether we should have an actual knowledge standard in our COPPA update. And of course, I can't tell you where we're going to conclude because we haven't concluded it. You work at the FTC, so you know this, but we are weighing the evidence, and we've certainly seen submissions from the business community, but and we're taking them very seriously. But it's also worth noting that the data practices for kids are not very good. We just put out a report on Monday on kids apps, and that report found that only 20% of the 400 apps provided, and I'm borrowing my colleagues' notes, 400 apps we tested provided parents with a link to privacy policies or other disclosures. There has got to be better disclosure by kids apps that are collecting information, and there just isn't. And so, our sense on COPPA, we've called for a do not track option for consumers, and a lot of people support that. There's enormous support in the public. There's a lot of support among businesses, but it's a different calculus when you're talking about COPPA protected sites and when you're talking about children. So, when you're talking about children, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to privacy and kids, not the data collection, and I think everyone understands that. So with that, we are doing what we always do at the Commission, which is which is bipartisan collaboration, weighing the evidence, and with some luck, we will have our COPPA update concluded by sometime next week, and sometime before the end of the year, certainly.
We agree. As a matter of fact, both in the Digital Advertising Alliance and DMA, we are looking at, particularly mobile apps, they're basically brand new and trying to try and get self-regulatory principles to get transparency, to get it so that we do have information for parents and to follow COPPA that way to make sure that we get.
Absolutely agree. And some of this involves app developers who don't know their obligations under the law. They develop these apps in their garage. We all understand that. But the fact of the matter is, they are still sucking up a lot of information from kids without adequate notice to the parents. And the whole notion of, and I don't need to talk to these guys about it, they wrote the law. The whole notion is that the parents need to be the gatekeepers for collecting information from children.
And John is right. I am the author of COPPA. But when I was drafting that bill, that was in the BF era, in the before Facebook era. And so I compliment the FTC for taking COPPA and updating for this modern era that we are now living in. Because obviously that was my intent in the beginning. It's not a situation where there's just a permanent state of technological advancement that it just stops. And so what they're doing is wisely, taking that existing statute and updating it, ensuring that we do have those protections in place. Jeff, did you want to
Just briefly, because I concur with what the chairman said, tremendous amount of data collection on target-directed sites. Our research, other research, shows that child-directed sites, tremendous amount of behavioral targeting, hopefully be covered by the COP rules. Just to sort of underscore, teens are unprotected. Once you turn 13 in this country, you are no longer protected in terms of your privacy online, on teen-directed sites. All the complex and powerful data broker techniques and systems are in place, targeting teens, knowing that they're a teen. You can go on our website, digitalads.org, and see many, many examples just from junk food. So I want to underscore, gentlemen, I also want to congratulate the dynamic duo of privacy in the big data era, Congressman Barton and Congressman Markey, that we have to protect teens as well.
Thank you. Anyone else from the industry that would like to be recognized to comment on this area of child privacy and the protection? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Axiom's been in this business for over, in the data services business for over 40 years and in providing information products to the marketplace for almost 25. So we do take our responsibilities as a data keeper very seriously, and they go way back into our roots. And it is the reason that we decided, because we understand the sensitivity around children's data and teen data, that we do not collect any information either knowingly or consciously on anyone under the age of 18 in our marketing products that we sell to our clients. We have investigated, because we do also have a line of identity verification products, whether or not we could create a children's or a teen identity verification offering so that websites could have a better understanding of when they're dealing with a teen or not. And after investigating it, we found that the sources of data to do that just don't exist, so it complicates the product.
Professor Sweeney, would you like to?
Well, I've been, my recent work has been more on when children's data gets caught into some of the same kinds of problems that adult data have. So so for example, juvenile mugshots get caught into the same kind of problems that you see with adult mugshots, where companies will harvest the mugshots that are going to mugshots from municipalities and print their name on it, rig it so it shows up high on the search engine, you type in the person's name, and then only remove it if you'll pay them a fee, which is so when you're a juvenile, even if you have if it's a juvenile, it's not even clear that the record should have been released anyway, but then it's still subjected to the same thing when his friends or somebody like that searches his name. The other thing that we found was we did a study recently of online advertising, racial discrimination about the occurrence of the application of an arrest record. When you search for a name when you search on it for a name where the ads are served by Google, and you type in the name, many of the companies here have ads there, and others as well. But some of the companies, none of which are here, often will suggest that the person has an arrest ad, especially if they have a black identifying names. And so when we surveyed, we did hundreds of thousands, a little over 120,000 searches. The first 4,000 that we did, we found juveniles in there as well. So typing in the name of a person who's a juvenile, you see the same problem. And you might say something like Darnell Jones arrested with a question mark, but a younger person whose name might be Jake or Jack, and more of a white identifying name, you see that doesn't, you get a much more neutral ad.
Commissioner Brill, would you like to comment on that?
We've seen Professor Sweeney's work, and we saw the articles about it, and we thought that it was very powerful and interesting and needs to be examined much more closely. On the issue, generally speaking, of children's information and how it's being used, I was extremely pleased that we were able to get out our report on kids' apps and the amount of information that is being collected on apps. I agree with Jennifer that there's a whole offline and older world of data that is being collected and used, and probably many of those businesses are more accustomed to the law because it's been around for a while. But we do need to be very mindful that this industry, that data generally is moving in the society in new ways that are rapidly changing and rapidly evolving. And in the app space, there really were some very troubling findings in our report. So in addition to the fact that we only had 20% of apps, of the top apps that we looked at, that had any information about their collection practices, we also found that 60% of the apps were providing information to third parties, and those included analytics companies, ad networks, and others. So it really is something that we need to be very mindful about, that both in the older way of collecting information, we need to be careful about what's happening with children, but also in this new rapidly evolving technological space, we really need to try to ramp up awareness of the laws and the rules.
May I ask, let's just take a concrete example, and then perhaps someone from the industry can deal with it so that we can hear the conversation. The girl is 13 years old. She's anorexic. She just goes online to find out more information about the subject. Only her mother really knows about it, and no one else in the family knows about it, much less anyone else. Now that information is out there online, and she starts getting bombarded with information about weight loss, about other therapies perhaps for anorexia. So how do we protect that girl from that kind of assault from the private sector, when clearly this is a family issue where the girl has just gone off by her own, on her own to find out about it? So would anyone from the industry like to talk about that and what protections you might think is appropriate to be put on the books in order to ensure that, like the 13-year-olds that we were, that it was within the confines of your own family and not out there for the whole world. People have a right to grow up, I think. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you. That's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get an answer from this group. We are what you have called data brokers, but we don't collect information about children, and we don't provide information about children. And so what you're talking about online, even though we collect information from online sources and offline sources, we don't collect and we distribute that kind of information that allows an ad to be delivered via cookies on the internet. And so you have to ask that of a different type of data broker. When we were talking about definitions do matter, because unless you define what a data broker is, you're not talking to the entire world of data brokers. There's a concept that there are this many data brokers. There are thousands of data brokers in the nation, so we've got to define them, know what world we're talking about, whether we're talking about the use of data brokers for marketing, for fraud and authentication, for credit reporting, for people search. They've all been conflated already in the small little conversation we've had so far. Hope that helps.
Well, but that dodges the question. The question really is, should we protect our children?
And I think, yes, we all agree we should. But we're not the ones to advise you on that, because we don't collect information.
So you would support a Markey Barton bill that was a flat prohibition against collecting any data on anybody under the age of 13?
We don't collect information on anyone under 13. So it wouldn't,
you don't know anything.
That's right.
So you would, the answer to that is yes, you would support a Markey Barton amendment of the bill.
Well, you're asking the wrong person. You have to ask the marketers whether they support that. We don't collect information on
but you can
anyone.
still answer the question. You either do or don't support it. I would think the straight answer would be you do, since you don't collect it.
Well, it depends on how you wrote the bill. I'd have to see the bill. But, I mean, generally speaking, we don't.
It's a one-sentence bill. There shall be no data collected on any person under the age of 13 in the United States of America.
It wouldn't affect our business operations.
So you support it?
I don't know.
Let's go. Can we go to Jerry? And then we'll get Jerry's line.
Thank you. First, in answer to Congressman Barton, again, the same issue arises that you have to, therefore, if you're not going to collect information from children under the age of 13, you have to know that the individual is a child and under the age of 13. So that in essence tends to force some collection in the absolute. From the point of view, Congressman Markey, in your situation, right at the moment there is a self-regulatory program. The Digital Advertising Alliance has it with the ad choices icon that appears on over 1 trillion ads every month. As you click on that, there's a means to opt out. You even have a choice for a persistent cookie or anything that's on your device that's a cookie, so that you would not get targeted ads. You're still going to get ads. That's one of the things we enforce it. We get complaints that people think that when they opt out, they're not going to get any ads, or you're not going to get targeted ads. The key here is, and part of this hearing is part of it, is education. Education to everyone. And children are computer literate. Education to all that this is here, and it is an opt-out to opt out of targeted ads, period. Targeted ads from certain companies, but there's an easy single click to opt out of all of them. And I think that's important. It's there. It's working right now, and it's evolving as we're going to mobile space on the same thing to try and get the same type of persistent opt-out and requiring education. We have a website. We have over 17 million people in a year have visited. We have 1 million that have opted out, and this is a brand new program just starting. So that's one way that where industry wants to try and start and move on. And of course, it may well be that in your similar situation that someone, a parent, worried about the child being anorexic, going and looking at it, and would like to receive, therefore, then information on other sources that try and help them as a parent with a child. So you can't, at the time of this device went to see that ad, it's difficult to know, so you have to give those kinds of choices, and we're in favor of that habit, and we need to have much more education on it and put forward, and that's one part of this briefing. Thank you.
We're not anti-ad. We understand that free internet can exist if somebody doesn't provide funding so that you have access to it. But this is not, there shall be no advertising on the internet. We're not even anti-targeted advertising if it's knowing. The problem is the ubiquitousness of these data collectors that collect all this information without anyone's knowledge, and especially if it's a child, and then they sell it, collect it, protect it, and try to package it without the knowledge and affirmation of the individual. That's the problem.
And that's why that's one of our choices to try and get the icon on there so that the knowledge is exactly there, and that's part of it, and that's a program that industry has started, and it can be judged on its own.
Commissioner Brill. We go quickly to Jeff and then to Professor.
I think we should be concerned about the anorexic teen, the anorexic adult. And what has to be said is that this data broker system has dramatically changed. What you have is an interacting complex in real time of your companies. One of the people on the panel just recently, I won't mention the name, recently presented. Here are their partners, BlueKai, Excellent, Loadamate, Bizzo. The list goes on. What's happening in real time, you may not know it's a child or teen, but your data is being integrated in real time with a host of other data brokers, and that we're being tracked wherever we go on our mobile phones, what we do online with a host of data points, and we can be targeted and influenced, without any control, accountability, ability to understand what's being collected, and decide some things should not be collected at all. So I think we need to talk about the system that's been put in place here, this far-reaching surveillance system, without the consent of the American people, without the ability of the American people to control it, that's affecting our finances and our health and other important aspects of our identity.
Professor. Can you move the microphone over a little bit closer?
Yes, thank you. I also want to support what Jeff Chester just said. So basically, in some ways, there was a kind of disconnect between what the congressman said and the response that came back, and it's exactly on the case of ad networks. If that anorexic young girl is surfing the internet, there is no way for her not to be a part of the ad network, and companies at this table provide offline data to the online data, so that in order to provide an ad to her that was specifically rooted for, specifically fits the behavior that was witnessed during her browsing. And so it's exactly the ad network, especially when it's empowered by being combined with offline data and done so in real time, so that while she's surfing, she's likely to get an ad that's right on that point. Or worse, the person who comes to use her computer next. And a good example is BlueKai. And the reason BlueKai is a great example is because you can take your computer, you can go to BlueKai's site, you can look at the registry, and they will tell you what they know about you. And in that telling you what they know about you, they'll tell you their demographics and the marketing profile they have of you based on the site that you've been to. And so there is no easy way to solve that problem without figuring out a bigger solution. But I do push back and say that it does affect some of the companies that do.
Sure. Just briefly, it would be great if consumers all knew where to go to get that information, how they're being described in terms of whatever it is that they're doing online. But of course, consumers have no idea who these entities are or how to get to them. But your question really raises a very important issue, not only about children, but also about health information. I mean, Congress has said that health information is a sensitive area, and you stepped in to protect it, but it's protected in what I view as fairly limited circumstances that really are not focused on the new age of technology. So if there is a young girl at the age of 13 or someone who's 25 and researching information about a health condition, that information is not covered by HIPAA unless they're dealing with an entity that comes under HIPAA, and the various websites that give out health information are not necessarily covered. And so I think we need to be thinking about what are the sensitive areas of information that maybe go beyond the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that are HIPAA-like pieces of information, but they're not yet covered by HIPAA. And I think your question very much goes to that issue, how we deal with health information.
Mr. Cheryl, would you like to comment on this issue?
Well,
can you move in the microphone just a little bit closer?
So again, we don't knowingly collect any children's information. In terms of somebody advertising by OBA, yes, that happens. But as Jerry pointed out, there is that new Forward Eye program, so that people can click on the Forward Eye. I've done it. You can see the information they have about you, the interests that they think that you're curious about or want to get more information on, and you have the ability to opt out. We too have an ability on our website if a consumer calls a company and says, "How'd you get my information?" They'll give them our name. They can go to our website. They have a number they can call, and we can have consumers opt out. And we don't share their information if they opt out. So there are mechanisms in place. Maybe there's some new technology that we need to look a little closer at. But I think the self-regulatory endeavors that we've made so far are making progress. And maybe we need to tweak them a little more, but they're making progress.
What do you do about the people that knowingly and willfully say they're not going to be a part of the self-regulatory system? And there are large numbers of them.
As I understand the DMA's enforcement mechanism, that if they get a complaint from a consumer, even if they're not a member of the DMA, they will work with that group and try and get them to change. And if there really is a problem that they can't solve, then I hear that they then go to the FTC and talk to them.
So let's go to Mr.
Thank you, Congressman. Both Congressman Markey and Congressman Barton have been long-time champions on privacy. And the original Fair Credit Reporting Act in 1970 gave consumers rights, but it has been passed by the expansion of companies that are outside of its definitions of when a consumer has those rights. And in the 1970s, 1980s, and even the 1990s, decisions about consumers' financial practices were made based on their credit report. But the universe or the ecosystem that Jeff explained, today we're not serving ads on the internet based on this conglomeration of interconnected companies. We're actually making decisions about people in real time, as the professor also described. This OBA, this online behavioral advertising, I presume is what that stands for. I'm not always in this business, so I have to sometimes figure out the acronyms even myself. But we have this massive set of companies that are outside of regulation, and they're making decisions about consumers. I want to credit the Federal Trade Commission not only for its privacy report, but also for saying that when those companies cross the line and become credit bureaus, they will take swift action. And the Congressman may not be aware that there are companies out there that are mining Facebook and using the information to make decisions about people. And the FTC says, hey, when you do that, you're a credit bureau. But what about the rest of them? We need to really take the kinds of actions that Jeff has described. Thank you.
So let me just stop there. Mr. Barton and I, we have to go focus on I we have to make a couple of roll calls, but we can be back here, I think, in 12 or 13 minutes. Okay? So if we can take a brief recess. Okay. Could you do that? Yeah, why don't you continue the conversation? You don't have a forum. It's like in Casablanca, this is the beginning of a beautiful conversation that I think everyone, has to be a part of if we're going to solve this problem. And I think we all agree that this problem has to be solved. Okay? That children are protected and not exploited. So we'll move over to cast our votes and come back as quickly as possible.
Luckily, I do have 5 minutes. Everyone makes fun of me, but it's always good to have them. So I want to pick up on something. Did you have something you wanted to start out with?
Yes, I'd like to start out because I'd like to agree with Ed.
Okay, great.
That is, the credit reporting system is a existing law, and it's a very broad law. It says that a company that collects any information that goes to a person's credit character, capacity, or mode of living, and shares that information with a third party for an eligibility determination under law. So any company that collects any information and shares it for an eligibility determination is a credit bureau. And if companies are using data for eligibility determinations, whether they be credit or insurance or employment or government licenses or whatever the permissible purposes are, they should stop it. And FTC should take them and they should enforce the law against them. And so we commend your efforts to try to not only enforce that law, but we would also ask you to please do a better job of helping educate the community about that very bright line so that people aren't stumbling into that law too.
Well, we're working hard on that. I want to raise something, though, about the FCRA and what happens when you sort of come right up to where that line is. Because we all have read some of the great work that's being done by newspapers in this area, and what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the e-scores that have been out there and have been talked about. And I won't mention any companies, but the notion that there are firms who offer products, whether they're financial products or other products, that have decided what they're going to do is before they ever market to consumers, they're going to try to figure out which consumers are the appropriate ones for their financial product. So it's kind of like a marketing score as opposed to a credit reporting score. But what is going to happen? I'd really like to hear from the members of the industry. Number one, what is your view about marketing scores? And what is your vision about how marketing scores might be used in the future when everyone is seeking, or many people will be seeking all of their financial products and services online? And their offers will be very much tailored to how they are described in this scoring system, which arguably may fall outside of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So I'm very much interested in the line you're talking about, Tony, but also what do we do with activities that either are across the line or just before the line, and is there something that we ought to be doing to learn more about those practices and giving consumers more control, just as they have in the Fair Credit Reporting Act? So any industry folks want to talk about the scoring, marketing scoring issues?
Well, you're talking about then a propensity score, right? And that is this person interested in my product or service? So those are legitimate products that marketers want to know. Take a catalog company. If they're going to mail a catalog, that's an expensive proposition. They want to know, is this person likely to buy from this catalog? Because if they're not, I don't want to. So those are kind of propensity scores that are really good. Now, when we're talking about financial offers, from a credit card issuer or a mortgage company or a student lender or an auto lender, they have propensity models too about whether is this person in the market for a credit card? Is this person in the market for an auto loan? But you can't ignore the fact that despite the fact that that's not a eligibility determination under the FCRA, they still have to deal with fair lending and disparate impact and ECOA factors in their entire operation. So we can't ignore that there's a penumbra of laws beyond the FCRA in the fair lending environment that forces discipline on financial institutions who are marketing.
So I totally agree with you, there are those other laws, but my understanding of some of the scoring that's out there, and again, anyone else who wants to jump in, please do. It's not just are you in the market for an auto loan, but are you, what kind of a borrower are you? What are your other, what other things have you bought? What other kinds of loans have you taken out? So that it's much more than just are you in the market, but is this the type of customer that a bank or an auto lender or whatever might want? And that's the aspect of it that I think gets closer to fair credit reporting, but may not actually fall into that category. That's the issue I'm raising. Not just are you in the market for a loan, but what kind of borrower are you, and would you be?
Right, and those are issues that surround the concept of weblining or dynamic pricing, things like that, right? And so I think it's important to understand that at least from our perspective, we don't have products and tools that allow or encourage or are directed at dynamic pricing or decisions like that. Now, dynamic pricing exists in the marketplace. Look at the hotel industry and the airline industry and many others. I mean, prices change. But the pricing is the province of the marketer. But they really don't rely on information providers like Experian to help them with those pricing decisions, nor are we interested in advising them on pricing. We might have income models that go to a person's probability of earning a range of income, but that's probably about it that you see from the data brokers community.
Jennifer, do you have something, does Axiom get involved in?
We're not involved in the esports as you referred to it either.
Right. I'm using that term, if there's another term that ought to be used. Professor, did you have something you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I found the way you're characterizing this discussion, I actually found very fascinating. This term, I brought up earlier, this term I had two students, and what they did was they went out around the city of Cambridge, and anyone who had a Windows machine that would give them time, they would sit with them to look at the registry. And one of the things that's interesting is they had done this experiment 2 years ago, and to see how the kind of data that the offline data is really important to what Drupal can do. And the way it's important is because it's the most accurate. So they had two things to do. One was sit down with the person, review the profile, identify how much was correct and how much was incorrect. And so in both 2 years ago and now, the role of offline data that gets fused into while you're surfing the internet is really important because it's the most accurate. It tends to always be the accurate data. But the biggest difference from 2 years ago to now is exactly what you're saying. Not just do you see the propensity scores in the blue card data, but you also see the characterizations, just like you were describing. And so there are these key phrases that identify you, and you're the person. The way it works for those who don't follow is basically you're surfing around the internet. It's tagging your visits. Like if this is a website that normally men who are in their 40s go to, they'll think you're a man in your 40s, and then you go to a website that an 8-year-old would go to, they'll think maybe you're in your 8-year-old, and the contradiction doesn't get resolved that way. It's only when you actually buy something or you sign up for something that they're most likely to be able to link you to the offline data, the kind of data that's represented here. And then that comes into the profile and then really cleans up the profile. And now it's much more accurate. And so now the next place that you go gets the profile as you're visiting the site and can decide what ad to deliver, what price to set, and so forth. And so this does begin, you can imagine that if you just push 2 more years, it will feel a lot like a credit score. It's almost like my credit rating is getting there before I get there.
I think that's a good point, and one of the things that I think is important to understand about this debate is that what we're talking about here is not only data supply, but how it's used. And so you cannot look at this ecosystem from only looking at data brokers. That's what I keep saying. They're defining it way too narrowly. It's like a credit report. There's a credit bureau that holds the information, but there's someone that uses that information. And they have to be bound by particular rules.
Well, we'll get to the definition of a
we're getting
data
to scores and how that information is scored and used. That's a whole different debate that has to be with someone else.
So I agree with you, and I want to have a conversation a little bit in a moment about this definitional issue, because I know you've raised it, many others have raised it. But let's stick with this topic for a minute, if we can, about what we can call propensity scoring or e-scoring. But again, the topic is that, Congress has said very clearly that there are certain uses that are sensitive, and certain uses where consumers' access and correction rights will be very robust. And the question is, what do we do with respect to data collection and use that comes up to that line but may not quite cross it, just along the lines of what I was saying, what the professor was saying. So, Jerry, I see you to comment, and I thought Jeff, you to comment, so we'll go Jeff and then Jerry and then anyone else. If someone else had a comment, I'm sorry.
I'll go Jeff and Jerry and me.
And Ed and I have written a paper, other people have reported on these scores. We written a paper which is now available on the SSRN website, which we can give you about this system, describing this system. Look, the data broker industry is part of the system. The data broker industry is a lot of this complex of companies. Not only are they involved in delivery of digital advertising products themselves, right? But they are allowing the data to flow into, they are part of the marketing system consciously and willingly. And the data is then taken by the interactive advertising applications, right? We're talking about cross-platform, multi-dimensional data points now collected, social media, mobile, to make determinations about users. So, for example, as we talk about in our paper, you have been identified as someone who, in fact, needs a payday loan. The data's been pulled from, not your database, but from one of the databases here. It's been created into interactive advertising application. You're getting a high interest rate loan. You're getting, Jerry, because I know you, a very good low interest credit card loan, because IXI has got an algorithm that says you're a long-term winner. And they decided not to even serve you, to bypass you, to bump you to another company because they think, this is not true for us. So all of these decisions about a person's financial behavior, about the access to health information, race is an incredible part of this, which I find personally very disturbing. It's all being used in real time to make determinations, whether it's propensity scores or algorithms. Once again, non-transparent, unaccountable, and that's not the way it should be.
Jerry, did you want
to? Yes, I want to, going back to your question of where we're at in the use of some financial information that's not Fair Credit Reporting Act. I think that it's important to remember what Fair Credit Reporting Act does is looking at an eligibility. Jerry, you're not eligible for this credit card. You're not eligible for this loan. The answer is no. And you go below that line, and it's sort of like thinking about, I put an ad into People magazine or I put an ad into Forbes. It's going to be a different ad based upon what the audience is. So what we're doing below, what marketers are trying to do below, is go knocking on your door with an offer. But it doesn't mean that you can't step outside and go look elsewhere. And then when you try and go somewhere else, not someone who's knocked on your door, and you get turned down or approved, then you're into the Fair Credit Reporting Act area. So I think it's important. I think Tony raised it, at least mentioned it. The importance is looking at, in part, the use. It's not just the data. It's looking at the use. Data can be used in a Fair Credit Reporting Act area. It can be used in health areas. It can be used in marketing. Now, we have, and the same data, depending on where it comes, can be used. And I think many of the companies here, if they do a eligibility product and they have a marketing product, there's a firewall. Now, some of the data on both sides may be the same, but the marketing side is used to knock on your door.
So I totally understand. I get that. I totally get that. And just give me one minute before we turn to you. The problem is, and what I'd like you all to focus on is what about the consumer who only sees ads for subprime loans, because that's how they've been bucketed. And, again, I envision a world not too distant future where a lot of this information and a lot of the transactions will be taking place entirely online. So a consumer is bucketed and described as, in all of these profiles, as being basically a subprime customer. All she'll see are offers for loans at not particularly attractive rates. And how does that consumer get out of that bucket? If in fact maybe she does belong in that subprime category, but maybe she doesn't. How does she get into that data source? How does she get into that data, that series of pieces of data about her to see what it is and to determine, hey, wait, this isn't actually right. I did pay back that loan, or that bankruptcy belongs to somebody else, or whatever it is that has caused her to be put into a subprime bucket. How does she get at that? And again, I understand the distinction you're making between marketing and eligibility, but I'm not sure that it's as bright a line as you're describing if, in fact, the only offers that type of consumer receives are based upon data that place her into a bucket so that she's just seeing, as I said, subprime loans or other kinds of financial products that are not at an attractive rate. And that's truthfully what my concern is.
I understand that, and I think if she were in that bucket, whether correctly or incorrectly, but in that marketing bucket, and the only thing she was ever eligible for was the offers she was receiving, those that were knocking on the door, I think you're right. I think that becomes a credit report. But it's not. That she can look at the rights that you have. She can get her credit score, which is not part of that bucket. It's a credit score elsewhere that's covered with rights of correction, and see where it is, and can go out and get a loan. She's not barred.
No, I'm not saying she's barred, but I think that practically, we have to look at the way the market is working. That's my concern. But let's broaden this out. I mean, I realize she could go down the street and maybe get a loan, and then all. But is that the way financial transactions will be? And what is the role of the advertising offers that she's given, and then the decisions that consumers make based on those advertising loans? And that's something I think that we need to be thinking about. But Ed, I think you wanted to jump into this conversation.
Commissioner Bill has made most of the points I would make, and our paper, which is on SSRN, and it's forthcoming in the Suffolk University Law Review, goes into greater detail on this. But I totally submit that the line is blurred or the line is moved, and that we're not talking about opening the door to advertising. We're talking about a pre-decision that is made about which consumers are subprime, which are prime, and it may not cross the technical line of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but all the kids are doing it. No one's doing it at this table, apparently, but there is information from the companies at this table, I would submit, that maybe from the non-regulated, non-FCRA arms, that is being collected into these ad network ecosystems and being exploited by firms, and whether you call it redlining, weblining, or whatever you want to call it. I think, Jeff, what does Joe call it? He says people are either gold or trash.
It's
this is
waste or...
waste. This is Professor Joseph Turow, an expert in this area.
But he also calls it a system of discrimination.
He also calls it social discrimination, but I think we really need to look at where is the line moved and what can we do about it. And when we look at the system, it's completely non-transparent. No offense, I have to disagree with the comments that have been made by several of the industry representatives. I don't want to go to 1,000 different data brokers and opt out. I don't want to look for some little I on a website. I want a single right to say no to my information being shared to be used for socially discriminatory subprime lending decision making.
So, also, Professor, because I want to make sure others get involved in the conversation, but please jump in on this issue, and then we'll move on to another one.
Well, I was actually, I mean, no one wants more regulation, and I know you don't want to engage in more regulation, and so I can hear that very strongly, that pushback. But I do think the conflict that Commissioner Brill brings forward is a real conflict. I mean, if you're online and you basically have the blue collar or other ad network identity, you actually have multiple of them, and you move forward 2 years, and they're basically dictating the experience and the offers you're going to get online. And one of the things that was nice about the Credit Reporting Act was it basically was fair information practices. I could get it, I could see it, I could edit it, I could challenge it. I can't edit it just freely, but I could challenge it. And so one of the questions I have is maybe trying to figure out how to instill fair information practices into the ad networks is a possible way forward. It doesn't necessarily need through new regulation. It might be through sort of thinking about how could that fit naturally into the way people are doing things.
So what I want to turn to, thank you, I want to turn to some solutions, and which is what you were just touching on, and the issue of how do we make the existence of the various players in the ecosystem more transparent to consumers. Everybody knows that the Federal Trade Commission has called on industry to consider developing a centralized website where consumers can go to find out who has marketing lists, who has eligibility lists, and what are the different choices that consumers have with respect to this kind of data. And I understand that it can be a tough conversation if the industry is looking around and saying, gosh, everyone who has a marketing list is going to be on a website. That's going to be very difficult for consumers to navigate. How do we do that? And I know that there are some hard conversations underway, which I think are good, and I'm very pleased that industry is having those conversations. But many of you sitting around this table many of you in the industry, do give consumers opt-out rights, do let consumers know what choices they have. So I want to hear, if we can, from Jim and from Mr. Gudmundsson about the choices that you currently give consumers, and also your views, and as well as anybody else who wants to jump in, Jennifer or Tony, or even though it's only been 2 weeks, if you want to as well. Given that you do give choices to consumers, how would you envision shaping a web portal or some other centralized way for consumers to access the kind of information that you are providing to your customers, so that consumers can see what it is the information you have, and then they can make choices that you already are offering to the consumers, but in a more centralized way. So I don't know, Jim, if you want to go first.
Sure. So different than many of the companies around the table. we have a consumer-facing site, as you know. So
well, I don't know, but you might want to explain.
So Intellius is we offer publicly available information about people. We see about 1 million people, 1 million visitors to our site every day. So we have a considerable amount of consumer traffic. So we recognized a long time ago that consumers need and would desire some level of access to their information and the ability at least to be aware of it. We sit since we're consumer facing, we can't necessarily change the information because it comes from us from upstream providers. But we did feel like it's very important. We talked about this a lot. I think transparency is very important in this BFF era. I think people want to have access to their information. And we offer a product called TrueRep.com where you can go see the profile that someone could publicly see on you. You can execute privacy controls. You can suppress the latest contact information. You can actually annotate some of the information that's on that profile. So you may not be able to correct it yet, but I think that will come with time. You're able to at least annotate that information. For example, if sometimes information that comes from government sources are misleading. We have criminal information on our site. There's a friend of mine, when I took the position in Intellius, the county had a criminal trespassing charge on his record. And he said, Jim, can't we change that? And I said, no, that's how the county reports it. Well, I jumped the fence at a concert in college. I didn't break and enter. And I said, that's fair enough. You should be able to somehow let your side of the story be heard in this public realm. And I think that's really empowering. And I think it's important that we provide that level of transparency. Because I think that at least clears the public record or provides both sides of the discussion.
Mr. Benenson, can you describe very briefly, because I have another question I want to ask everybody, the current access and choice mechanisms that you give to consumers with respect to FICO and FICO scores?
Yeah.
Is your mic on?
Is this on?
Yes, I think so.
As you know, Commissioner, the FICO is a data analytics company. Sure. We collect data and we build models. We deliver software solutions to our clients. All of the models we build are with depersonalized data. So we don't get data. Now, it is true that sometimes our customers come to us and say we would like a more robust solution with respect to marketing, advertising, customer management, debt collection. They give us their database. We then have their database. We apply our models to their database and give them a solution. So we don't give customers any rights to access or correct because it isn't our data. It's the data of our customers. So we're not really in the same position to answer that.
Okay, that sort of leads to an interesting question, and I'm wondering if we could quickly go around the room. We've heard a number of people raise the question of who is a data broker and how you define a data broker. I would be really interested in hearing from all the members of industry here how you would define a data broker. So, would you, 3 weeks? You got it?
So I've been asked this question
every week.
So you got three
so I'm not sure I'm going to tell you, I have a consistent response. I'm not sure I'm going to tell you what the affirmative answer is, but I think it has to do with consumer-specific information. And I know that Equifax does not deal with consumer-specific information outside of FCRA.
So in other words, you would say that an entity that is dealing with, that is not holding on to information that is specific to individual consumers is not a data broker, that it would need, that part of the definition at least would need to include that the information is related to a specific consumer.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you include a specific UDID for a mobile device or a specific IP address? I mean, how specifically targeted would that have to be to be linkable to an individual?
I can only speak to my limited knowledge, but for us, our very small marketing, non-FCRA business really only deals with ZIP +4 type of subsets. And so we wouldn't be dealing with personal devices.
Tony, how would you define a data broker?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't know how to define it. All I know is what I see written down from different interests, and I see them in several bills, or proposals, or reports. And the only thing I can say about that is that they're all definitions, or proposed definitions, for data brokers, and even the most minimal definition would sweep in thousands of companies. So, as we move forward in the internet, and with internet marketing and online...
Down to what we do with it. You could violate the FCRA, you could be in violation of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. It's really what you do with this information that either makes you a good actor or a bad actor. I did a talk on at Strata about thought crime, and the fact that we are now thinking outside our brain for the first time in history, and that's why this is such a historic conversation we're having. It's on YouTube, check it out. And I think that's really what is at issue here, not necessarily what the definition of data broker is, but what are we as people going to do with information, and we're going to act responsibly with it.
Can I just add, Julie, that I think it's collection. I mean, I am focused on the sensitive data uses. I want to have that dialogue. I think that's most important. But it's a system. I mean, the surveillance economy. You couldn't say it better than that. And why? And all the online systems are now offline, online, or integrated in real time. They're being purposely designed to collect and to profile, etc., without any involvement by the user. Why should that system be allowed to stand without it being, frankly, challenged?
Professor?
Yeah.
Can you push that?
Okay.
A little bit more.
All right, thank you. You know, in the era of big data, in some sense, I felt as though all of you are right. Because in the era of big data, what does it really mean? It means that I can buy a machine for which you could sell me all of your data. And then I become a data broker. And so then somebody else has another innovative commercial idea, and I can sell them data, and or they can buy from multiple people, and they're a data broker. So this idea that we are entering into this space where it feels like there are lots of data brokers is probably right, because there are lots of data brokers, which just really underscores how do you figure it out. Are you going to figure it out on if you're holding this kind of data, you're a broker, or if you're using it in these ways? I think, which is, of course, what you said as well.
One of the things that we've done in order to understand our role as a data broker is we've segregated, it goes back to uses. We have completely segregated databases, whether it's a credit database, or whether it's for authentication and fraud prevention, or whether it's for marketing. And we have purposes assigned to them either by law or by law and self-regulation. Here's something that's surprising. Our compliance department just told me the other day that there are 322 laws that govern the use of our marketing data, federal and state. And that takes about 78 people with an experience making sure we're complying with all of those. I don't know what a small data broker does about that.
Should we start just with large data brokers? Should we start with the top 100 or 200 that we just capture them? You know, the bulk of it.
And those would be the good actors, and then all the bad actors would still be outside the system.
No, I appreciate that. But at least all the good actors, all of them, would be inside of a regime, which would make it obviously a lot easier to then say, well, here are the people. Here are the renegades. Here are the pirates who are basically jeopardizing the reputation of the largest 100 or 200 companies that are actually operating under a law in a way that actually does protect the public. Would that make sense?
It seems to me that if we could agree on the definition of a data broker, then that's who falls into it. But that's where that's elusive. We haven't been able to agree on the definition. But once we agree on the definition, you're in or out, and then you have to be in it, right?
Can I jump in just for a second? I want to pick up on something Jeff said about collection, and I want to hold up the FCRA as an example of a law which has been around since the early 70s that is a use-based law. And the credit industry has changed dramatically. The regulated part of the credit industry, not the part that we were talking about earlier that's on the page, has changed dramatically, and yet that law has not had to change. And I think it's an excellent example of legislation that we can use as a model going forward to try to identify where it is we need very specific guidance about things that data brokers and other companies, not just data brokers, should follow in using that.
Thank you, Congressman. Our definition of data brokers, I would prefer to include the little companies, but I think that we rely on the Federal Trade Commission and other regulators to use a risk analysis and to use enforcement actions perhaps against the small bad actors and use rules for the bigger bad actors. That would be the way to solve the problem.
Well, one of the things, looking at the definition of data broker, I go way back in the idea of selling and so forth. LL Bean started by renting or obtaining from the state of Maine out-of-state license holders, hunting license holders, and then mailed out a piece for his shoes. And that's how that company started. So Maine itself, I guess, could be viewed as a data broker using it for that type of marketing. So it can be very, very broad. And I think the idea of looking at kind of a risk analysis makes some very good sense. And looking at use. As you take a look at the idea of setting something up for marketing, to send an ad, just let's go with, move back from your area to worry about the gray area in financial service, but selling a product or selling a service. You're doing, the company is doing that thinking, you're interested in this industry. And it doesn't have to be 100% accurate because it's probably too expensive for me for it to be 100% accurate. And you have this huge economy. I mean, your data-driven marketing, almost 9% of the American economy is growing and so forth. So you have to be careful in the risk analysis to take a look. You don't want to kill that. You can't, if you do, we have 9 million people there, it'll hurt everyone. So that's very important to look at it that way. And we looked at it in our DAA and the digital evidence icon. It does have fix in essence. You have the icon, it gives you the information. You can stop collection as well as transfer to third parties. There's a security piece on it. There's eligibility restrictions. You can't use it for employment, for health insurance and credit and so forth. And so the industry is trying to do that and look at that balance, and government has to do the same. And I think it's really important that use probably has to be the main key here, because because the e-commerce is just exploding, and mobile commerce within the e-commerce is exploding, and consumers are voting with their feet in their pocketbook, and you have to have a balance to not kill it. If you make that very expensive, put huge restrictions on it, force and accuracy that's not necessary, that we would think is not necessary, you can kill that. And it's very different from children. We have a difficult problem with children, but it's one that's there, but I think that's important.
Just to make sure that we're focusing on the Congressman's question, I think the question is if we have trouble identifying data brokers definitively, at least right now, there's a lot of disagreement about exactly what goes into who is in and out of the definition of data broker. But we want to create a portal for consumers to make it easier for them to understand who at least the large players are, who's providing most of the information in this economy so that they can exercise their rights. I think what the Congressman was asking was, can't we begin with the top 100, 200, 300, whatever number, and create the portal that the FTC has called for, and let's get started. Let's get started. And then if we need to adjust, to refine, everyone is always open to that. But I think that was the question that the Congressman was asking. And I would be very interested in, as I'm sure he is, in hearing responses to that question.
I just want to say that I don't think transparency is enough. And part of it is, it's, without getting technical, it's the way the individual is processed through the online advertising system. So they make their ability, you described, their ability to move is restricted based on the data and based on your interactivity. But I certainly would like to see control on the financial side, on the health side, on other areas we can agree it's sensitive. So individuals can decide whether or not that data is accurate and whether or not that data can be allowed to be used. Because as has been said, and I'm very concerned about this too, we all know it, you'll be applying for your mortgage on your mobile phone, right? And you'll be buying everything through your mobile phone. And you won't have the information. You won't see that icon, Jerry, even though you don't see it when it's on the PC too. But you won't see it. So we have to do this right. There's a lot's at stake.
So in 1994, we passed the Telecommunications Act. And then it died in the Senate, unfortunately, which is what the function of that institution completes. And then in 1996, we passed it again, and we were going to switch parties, but we actually kept the coalition together, with Democrats and Republicans. And out of the House bill, I was able to include a privacy bill of rights that would have to have been formulated across all of these platforms. So it was my goal then to have a concomitant effort to ensure that as we created the broadband era, so that companies like Google and eBay and Amazon and Google and YouTube could be created in 1997, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, it was my goal to have an accompanying set of privacy rights because obviously it was going to explode. And that got killed actually in the conference on the last night. The privacy that would accompany the broadband revolution. Okay, so I was saying that we have 10 votes. Otherwise, you just kind of wind up with people voting with their feet, with their clicks, heading into this new world in the same way that people, headed out west, from Boston and New York, as the Wild Wild West was being created. And they were voting with their feet. They were jumping in their Conestoga wagons and heading out there. And then once I get out there, they said, it would be great if we had a few sheriffs out here, how about you, Wyatt? How about you, we just need some people here who are now going to protect us because we're leaving behind the rules of the old world, and we're out here, and we didn't really intend to leave behind the rules. We just wanted to create more opportunities for ourselves, and for our families, but not without those values which our grandparents brought from the old country. We then had here in these cities that we're leaving, and now we want to accompany out here. So eventually that has to happen. So that's pretty much the discussion that we're having, but 16 years after the Telecom Act, was passed. It created the revolution, but it's not as though we weren't discussing it at the time. That was a big part of what we said would absolutely be necessary, because we were going to create the opportunity for big data to be created. That was the goal of the bill. That was the goal of the bill, to one source shopping so that everyone could get everything they needed, but at the same time, the children would be protected. And we're a little bit delayed on this, although COPPA, to be honest with you, was a response to that. I actually carved out COPPA as the child response to the 96 Act, so that there would at least be something there for children. I had to do that separately a couple of years after the 96 Act passed. But the conversation just has to continue here, and what you're all doing here is very helpful because it helps to pull back the veil of secrecy about this issue so that we can put it out in the open. We can talk about what needs to happen in a common sense way to protect families, and to especially protect children and teenagers up to age 15 who are very vulnerable in this modern world, and to the extent to which we can all agree that that is something that we have to find a solution. At least if we can't agree on that, of course, we'll never agree on adults. We'll never agree. If we just can't come together and say, of course there's a technological solution. Of course there's a capacity for brainiest people in the world at our best universities to come up with the algorithms that can provide this level of privacy. Of course, that's absolutely doable. In the same way that they can create algorithms to provide an infinity of information that you would have access to. The same software can be developed for privacy for children, for teens. So that's really what this conversation is all about. And I think that the FTC action next week, whatever is in it, is going to tee the issue up even more. So we're forced to discuss it. We're forced to pull the veil back even further, and then we can draw the lines. First, we go with big companies, maybe, then just kids under 15, whatever it might be. But at least we can all agree upon the things that we can all agree upon, and the technology can be created to do it. And so this conversation is very helpful to us. And what I'd like to ask, if we could, Commissioner, is we just go around, because we're going to have to vacate the room, unfortunately, in about 5 minutes. We'll give each of you 30 seconds to tell us what you want us to remember out of this meeting and what kind of you think should happen. Okay, we'll give each of you about 30 seconds to summarize. And can we just begin here and just come back around and we'll finish up with you, Commissioner.
Thank you. I'll take just a couple of minutes to reiterate a couple of points I made. I do think that focusing on use is extremely important. And Jeff Chester and I don't always agree on a lot of things, but I will say in this instance, I think that focusing in areas where we see real serious harm, whether it's children, whether it's e-profiling or whatever all these activities are, is a great place to start. As a big data broker, we may be involved in a lot of those activities, so we would probably appear in several of them, but it may be a way for consumers to understand this industry more rationally.
I think my takeaway for you would be this, is that there is no monolithic data broker industry in the United States. There are companies that collect and distribute data for different purposes, and each of them are bound by different sectoral law. I think there are 4 of them. There are those that collect and disseminate information under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. They're bound by those laws. There are those that collect and disseminate information for purposes of fraud prevention and identity authentication. Those are bound largely by Gramm-Leach Bliley and other financial laws. There are marketing companies who would collect and disseminate information for making the best guess about what advertisement you might be interested in seeing next. And then there are lookup services that provide services to the general public to look up people you're interested in, whether it's your neighbor or maybe your husband or girlfriend or boyfriend. But if we need to understand that there's no single definition of a data broker, but there are purposes and uses by which information is collected and disseminated to the commercial, nonprofit, and government sectors.
And I apologize too, because we do have to give the room back. So we're going to have to hold everybody else to 30 seconds, and I would appreciate it if you could provide it. Yes, sir.
A number of elements of this conversation
remind me of a parallel process that's going on within FCRA that's directed to trying to assist families protect children within their credit files. And so you could look at the state of Maryland that's already passed a law that would have credit agencies set up files for children and then have the family be able to install a freeze and a protection on them. So it's just something that's outside of this data, but parallel.
Thank you. Gary?
Yes, first, thank you. Then, take a look at use, as Jennifer said. Be leery of one size fitting all, because it can hit, you get 9% of the economy based on it. The other thing we haven't talked about is take a close look at self-regulation. We can move much more rapidly with self-regulation. That DAA icon took 18 months, and it's a trillion impressions a month, and 17 million Americans in a year, and 1 million opt-outs. So take a look at self-regulation as well.
Ed?
Yeah, three quick points. First, even though the Fair Credit Reporting Act is an imperfect law, it is our strongest and most robust privacy law based on the fair information practices, and that should serve as a model. Second, industry self-regulation in the privacy area has failed on numerous occasions. They keep starting from point one again and again every couple of years, and it only will work if its underpinnings are laws and enforcement, federal laws, federal enforcement. And then finally, I'm glad you've opened up this issue of looking at the ecosystem on the internet of real-time decision-making. It's not serving ads, it's making decisions about people.
I've been uncharacteristically quiet here today because I'm not here as a privacy advocate, but representing Hart Hanks. Hart Hanks is a service provider best known for correcting mailing addresses and for its weekly shopper. It doesn't own a database and it doesn't sell a database. So I guess my last point would be that the definition of who is a data broker, since Hart Hanks is the recipient of the Privacy Caucus letter, is very important.
Thank you. Professor.
I would underscore the fair information practices, the right to know, the right to see, the right to correct, and trying to figure out how to leverage those kinds of principles for developers' sake.
Jim?
I would echo the principle of transparency. We are mapping humanity onto this new technology, just like we have with every technology since we drew on cave walls, right? This is the newest technology. And behavior matters, and uses matter. And I think if we focus on uses and abuses, I think we de facto understand the nuances of those behaviors and not get locked into definitions like data broker definitions that are relatively inaccurate and I think quite a bludgeon and don't set us up for success. Thanks.
The history of privacy laws in the United States is very sector-specific. Things will occur and create privacy laws. The Video Privacy Protection Act happened when Judge Work was in trouble. The Driver's Privacy Protection Act was a result of a problem. HIPAA, COPPA, GLP. These things are reactions to things that we see, and we're now in that situation again. We're in a situation where there isn't a law that specifically prohibits or even restricts some of the problems that we have. I would just suggest that we be very careful. The tension between the incredible value of big data and the bad uses of big data, the so-called creepiness factor, it's a difficult line to draw, but I would suggest we be very careful.
First, thank you. Three things. We have to be concerned as a democracy about the purposeful and ubiquitous collection of information about every individual in the United States on all platforms, deliberately, collectively being implemented. Two, I agree with Jennifer and Jerry. We should look at sensitive data. We should look at uses. We should look at health. I think that's very important. We should look at race. And finally, we need legislation. We reiterate the call of the Obama administration for privacy legislation. The self-regulatory regime and icons are simply not cutting it yet.
So I would echo all the comments by the industry members too. So I'm not going to waste time on those. The key thing I think that I kept hearing out of here is that nobody understands some of the activities that are already going on. And so therefore I think education is something that we need to figure out a really good way to educate consumers about whether it's the forward eye or whether it's where they go to opt out. So I think that's something that should be thought about as we're going forward with this and thinking about the uses.
Okay, and then we'll finish up with Commissioner Brill, and I think we can all agree, from one sentence, that it is great to have someone this knowledgeable working through the issues. Thank you for that. Absolutely, great.
Thank you.
Level of detail she has.
That's very sweet of you. But I also wanted to just close by thanking you and thanking Representative Barton and also thanking Senator Rockefeller and his staff for drilling down into this issue. So I have two takeaways from this discussion. The first is the need for everybody, you all in Congress, we at the Federal Trade Commission, and others who care deeply about this issue, to get more information about the practices, to understand how data is collected and used in this entire ecosystem. So information, getting more information is key. I think the second takeaway that I have from this, as well as from other discussions I've had, is we really need to turn the technological question around. Technology is very much part of the data collection and use system, We need to develop tools, whether it's going to be through self-regulatory mechanisms or through legislation. We need to put technology into consumers' hands so that they have the tools to understand the practices and, where appropriate, to make decisions about how the data is used with respect to themselves.
Thank you. And we thank all of you, Congressman Barton and I. Now we have 50 co-sponsors of our bill, and it's just going to grow, I think, exponentially in the next Congress. This issue actually has, a salience for people's lives. And the more people learn about the issue of privacy, the more they understand how it can impact their children. I think the more they're going to expect public policymakers to put in place protections which are going to help those families protect their children. And I don't think anyone should expect this to go away, but rather to grow. And so we have to sort it out. We have to figure it out, because we may not yet agree on a definition of what is a data broker, but we all can agree that we all are defined by our values, and we must imbue this data broker industry with the values of privacy, transparency, and fairness, because those are the values of society. Those are the values that we all grew up with, and nothing can really escape those values. And the technology is there or can be developed that accomplishes those goals while allowing people to aspire to become billion-dollar corporations. They're not inconsistent. We separate out children and teenagers. And that can't be part of a business plan where everyone knows that they're vulnerable. And society's values say they should not be targeted. They should not be exploited. I think we can all agree on that. And if people think that protecting children and kids 15 and under is a slippery slope towards regulating and protecting adults, then they're missing the whole point of this. We have to regulate where we can regulate. The fact that we can't make progress on all fronts doesn't mean that we can't make progress on any fronts. And the one front we all should agree upon is children. And then we can leave for another day, those other issues. But at least let's agree on that. And if we do that in good faith, I think we can pass legislation that ultimately accomplishes that goal. And then we'll continue the discussion after that. But fighting over this, I think, and extending it is only going to, elevate a level of debate, controversy, which is unnecessary. We should just try to turn ourselves into problem solvers. We can put those technologies in place and allow the rest of the business model to continue. So we thank all of you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation next year, because we're going to be, Mr. Barton and I are committed to doing this over and over and over again, to find more co-sponsors, to build the interest in it, that would spread over to the Senate, so that they similarly are, with us, working towards finding this common answer. Thank you all so much.